Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. There's a reason why Article 1 of the Constitution is the structures around the legislative branch, and Article 2 of the Constitution imagine the structures around the executive branch. It was the legislative branch that was most important to the founders. It was rooted in the desires and dreams and priorities of the people. And the way in which we've structured ourselves and how we've become chosen to these bodies has changed over the years, but we are Article 1 for a reason. And the division of labor between the Article 1 branch and the Article 2 branch was not limited only to domestic policy. The Founding Fathers spent a lot of time talking about making sure that the Article 1 branch had significant say, dispositive say, over foreign matters as well. That's why we have the power to declare war, not the executive. That's why we have the power of the purse when it comes to funding overseas activities. And it is the reason why Congress gave itself the power to have oversight over the arms that we sell to the rest of the world. Because these arms and the relationships that surround the sale of these arms are amongst the most important foreign policy decisions that we make. And we don't have to look far to understand how arms sales can go wrong very quickly. It was the arms that we sold either overtly or covertly into the rebel forces in Afghanistan that ended up becoming the arms used by some of the most vicious terrorist groups that eventually attacked the United States. It was arms that we sold to Syrian rebels that ended up in the hands of the extremist Sunni Muslim groups there that we are in fact fighting. And so we have good reason why we have historically come together, Republicans and Democrats, to ask these questions about arms sales. And I agree with Senator Cardin that if we let this emergency declaration go without protest, without a vote, I don't know that we're ever getting the power to oversee arms sales back as a body. And it is just another mechanism by which we fritter away our co-equal responsibility to determine the course of America's role in the world to a growing imperial presidency, especially when it comes to matters of foreign affairs. And I want to be clear with my colleagues and the presiding officer that I didn't just adopt this view when I became a member of the minority party. I didn't just decide that this was important when Donald Trump became president. I, in fact, brought a resolution of disapproval of this very similar arms sale under President Obama. And I will note that there were 24 members of this body, 20 or so of them Democrats, who voted to maintain our prerogative, to vote against that arms sale. 20 members of the Democratic Party who were willing to vote, in a sense, to cancel out a sale proposed by a Democratic president. And so on this side of the aisle, we've been willing to hold to this principle, whether the president is of our party or is of a different party, because we think this is a nonpartisan principle. I agree with Senator Menendez and Senator Cardin that if we don't take a positive vote here, we are giving away this priority potentially forever, because this emergency that exists in the Middle East is not a new emergency. You could argue that if the emergency is related to Iranian behavior, it's one that is created in part by the policies of this president. And it frankly invites any president, Democrat or Republican, to be able to, just point to one of the various crises in the Middle East, of which there is always one, as the reason why Congress just can't be bothered to weigh in on this particular arms sale. Second and lastly, I want to go over quickly a case that I've made several times on the floor of the Senate. And that is the case that I think is shared by most smart watchers of the Middle East, that there really is not a national security disaster for the United States that equals that of Yemen today. First of all, it's a humanitarian nightmare. And it's not one of these humanitarian nightmares that was caused by a drought or a famine and the United States is just looking on and watching. It's a humanitarian disaster that we are in part causing. We are selling the bombs that are being dropped in a country where 100,000 children under the age of 5 have died of starvation and disease, where tens of thousands have been killed by conflict and the bombs that are dropping on school buses, on Doctors Without Borders facilities, on churches and weddings. And these are not all by mistake. Many of them are purposeful. We've never seen a cholera outbreak like the one that we have today. Never in our lifetimes. And just this week, the head of the UN relief mission there rushed here to Congress to give us devastating news. I don't know whether all of my colleagues were able to meet with her or get a briefing from her. But the head of the relief work in Yemen told us that there are 250,000 Yemenis who are so sick and so malnourished that they are beyond saving. 250,000 Yemenis are going to die this summer and this fall. The Saudis and the Emiratis have stopped funding the relief work, have stopped funding the World Health Organization and the World Food Program. They are all closing up shop. The conflict is bigger and in more places than ever before. The bombing has not stopped, and the money from the contestants is no longer flowing. This fall, we will see a catastrophic loss of life in Yemen that the world has not seen in a very, very long time. Second, this is all coming back to haunt the United States. These bombs that are being dropped, this famine that exists, is not seen as a Saudi-caused famine. It's seen as a U.S. Saudi-caused famine. And so these young Yemenis, and they are mostly young, are being radicalized against the United States. And there are willing places, willing contestants for their allegiance that are gobbling them up. Al-Qaeda and ISIS have never been stronger in Yemen. We've made some, I will admit, we have made some military progress against them in the last couple of years, but from the beginning of the conflict to today, they are much stronger than ever before. And they have more potential recruits than ever before because of our actions there. Third, there's no change in battle lines. Sit down with the maps of what the Houthis control and what the coalition controls. They are essentially the same today as they were a year ago or 2 years ago. Senator Cardin is right. There's no military solution here. The more bombs that the coalition drops, the more mercenary armies that they bring in from Sudan and other places, the more the battle lines just harden. Fourth, Iran gets stronger and stronger by the day. When this all started, the Houthis were not a proxy force of the Iranians. They relied on them. But as the war goes on, and our country stands unwilling to negotiate a peace, and we remain only willing to fund the war, Iran gets deeper and deeper into the Houthis. And when the political settlement is finally achieved, Iran will have much more of a footprint in Yemen than had we ended the war last year or the year before. And lastly, just to underscore this point that others have made, in the context of these gross, grave Saudi human rights abuses, whether it be the Americans that they are locking up today and torturing, or the dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi, as reported on most recently today by the United Nations, America just looks so fundamentally weak in the world. So fundamentally weak in the world. When the Saudis stick a finger in our eye by grabbing a U.S. resident, dismembering him in their consulate, and then lying to us about it until the evidence was so incontrovertible that they had to tell the truth. And the result of that is that we draw them closer in. Our Secretary of State goes to Saudi Arabia, not the Saudis coming to us. We offer them more nuclear secrets. We give them more weapons. And then inside this deal, not only do we give them weapons, but we actually grant them co-production of some of the most sensitive technology that we own, which is our smart bombs. That's the kind of deal that you do if the other party has leverage on you. We give co-production to countries when we feel like we're the weaker party. We're giving co-production of smart bombs. We're going to vote on this tomorrow. We're giving co-production of smart bombs to a country that just chopped up an American resident into little pieces and lied to us about it. What a world we're living in. It's important for this body to stand up for itself sometimes. Not standing up for your party, not standing up for your particular principles, standing up for yourself. I think I can make the case to vote for these resolutions based just on our institutional prerogative. But the war itself is a national security nightmare for us. And I said this when President Obama was perpetuating it, and I say it here today. So this has nothing to do, for me, as to who is in the White House. I have believed this from the start, and many of us have believed it from the beginning. Even if you don't believe in standing up for our prerogatives as an institution, standing up for American national security compels you to vote against these sales tomorrow. I want to thank Senator Menendez for being such a strong, resolute voice, not just for the principle of standing up for human rights, but for the principle of standing up for this body. And I'm glad to stand by his side and by so many others who are sponsors of this, and glad that he has brought us to the floor this evening. I yield the floor.